Frank Isola rolling in now to hang out with us. You can watch him on ESPN, read him at The Athletic, listen to him at SiriusXM as well as on this show pretty much every Thursday. Frank, what's up, my man? It's funny, maybe uncomfortable for Major League Baseball that the Justin Turner story I saw it was not led, but it was on ABC, NBC, and CBS News about him testing positive. What could have otherwise been a kind of victory lap for Rob Manfred to finish off the Major League Baseball season ended in a pretty ridiculous way, didn't it?
I think you're right, especially the way the season began. Remember, you had the defending champion Nationals. Their top player, Soto, had tested positive, so he wasn't available at the start of the season. And they had done a really good job playing at those three different venues, San Diego, L.A., and then, of course, in Arlington. And it was a terrific World Series. You had all that controversy in Game 6 with Blake Snell being taken out of the game. And now baseball made the big time. It made the national news for all the wrong reasons. And I guess Turner is still actually down in Arlington. Something tells me it was like a typical kind of athlete thing. When they were first of all, he must have been shocked that he had to come out of the game. He must be thinking, I feel fine. There's nothing wrong with me. It must be a false positive. And then when they're celebrating, he's thinking to himself, no, I've won my first ever World Series. I'm getting out there celebrating with my teammates. And now, of course, he's probably going to get in some trouble for Major League Baseball.
Well, his teammates probably, to be fair, and also the coaching staff had to be thinking, well, the guy played until the 8th inning with us already. If he's endangering us by being COVID positive, we're inside of the bubble in the first place. So how he would have gotten exposed to it is an interesting question. But also, is the 10 minutes or so that he spends on the field getting pictures and celebrating with us in some way actually going to increase in any way the danger from the rest of the team compared to what's already happened? I think the answer is no. And Major League Baseball really got lucky that somehow the Rays didn't come back and win this game, that Blake Snell got pulled, because then I think they'd have to sit out for a week or more waiting to see whether or not they could play Game 7.
Clay, if you go back to when the NBA decided to go into the bubble, that was always the fear. What's going to happen if a key player, Justin Turner, make no mistake about it, is a key player for the Dodgers? What would happen in the NBA if you had a key player before a big playoff game? Let's say before a Game 7. Like if LeBron James had tested positive before a Game 7, first of all, they're going to reveal that information, and he's not going to be out there playing. And you're 100% right. Think about how big of a story this would have been if Tampa Bay had come back and won, and now they don't have their third baseman who fields his position well, who, he's a clutch hitter. It's strange. It's almost as if Major League Baseball would rather take the grief about something like this, because then they could just look at it as, oh, well, this was just one player being reckless. This wasn't us telling him to go out on the field, and the Dodgers ended up winning. I think you're 100% right. I think they dodged a big-time bullet here.
Well, it also raises the question, I've been asking this for a while. I mean, imagine that we've got the Super Bowl going. You've got Patrick Mahomes of the Chiefs, and you've got Tom Brady of the Buccaneers. Those, by the way, are the two teams that I think are the best in the NFL right now. What if Brady and Mahomes both tested positive, totally asymptomatic, the last test before the Super Bowl? Are you telling me that we're going to see Blaine Gabbert for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and I think I'm trying to remember who it is, Chad Henne for the Kansas City Chiefs playing against each other in the Super Bowl? Or do you think they'd find a way to get those guys out in the field? And how would fans feel? I mean, if you're asymptomatic and it's the final game of the year or even a big playoff game and your quarterback tests positive, I mean, that's crazy. The quarterback, I think most people out there would say, the guy should play. They would have definitely said prior to COVID, he should play with the seasonal flu. And the seasonal flu is actually more dangerous to most young people.
The demise of the Patriots, or at least this current installment of a demise, kind of began with Cam Newton being unavailable to play. But even last week, when it seemed like the sky was falling on the Las Vegas Raiders because they had their entire offensive line, it looked like they were going to be unavailable, and then at the last moment they were all able to play. And I get what you're saying, the final test before they're able to take the field. I find it a little hard to believe, and I also think when the NFL finally does get to a Super Bowl scenario, which remember they would be in theory in a bubble.
Yeah,
and that's why I think for the most part the NFL's been able to pull this off. if you think about the NBA with, the story came out how they're going to try to play a 72-game season in the home arenas. What's going to happen now that the NBA player is out of the bubble? Because even in the bubble, you had a guy like Daniel House got caught, messing around with somebody. So you have
Lou Williams going to the strip club.
Exactly. Now you've had college students being college students. Perfectly understandable. We all were there once in our lives. And NFL, for the most part, has done a really good job. But in their personal lives, they're kind of allowed to do what they want to do. Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley were photographed at a house party together. You don't think that's going to happen with the NBA? So the NBA, and rightfully so, is getting credit for this bubble that they create. It's not something that can be replicated in normal life. I mean, we're all not going to be at a Disney resort getting 3 square meals a day. That's just not going to happen. So I think when the NBA, when they start up, and if it happens under this scenario where you're playing in home arenas, I think you're going to see the NBA in the same situation.
What are you hearing, by the way, about the NBA players? It seems like they want to start around MLK Day in late January, but it seems like the league itself wants them starting around Christmas. What's going to be the outcome here?
I just don't think that Adam Silver floats that stuff out like a trial balloon. I think that stuff gets out there, and I think it gets out there because there's a very good chance it's going to happen. The two most powerful guys in the league are LeBron and Chris Paul. And I know that Danny Green came out and said LeBron won't play the first month, but I think the players also have to be a little realistic here. I talked to an NBA assistant coach last night. He said, there's no way we can be ready. And my thing was, well, hang on a second. You guys had about 4 months off starting in March, and it's really only going to impact 4 teams. The 4 teams that made it to the conference finals, in Miami and the Lakers going to the NBA finals. I get it from their standpoint. It's a quick turnaround, but it means a lot for the NBA to get these games off by Christmas, because Christmas is a big day. You're trying to get those 72 games in. So I think the NBA players would have to make what would be, fall into the category of a sacrifice. And I think for them, I think it would be bad PR if it comes out, well, we're not ready to play yet. Come on, 8 of the teams stopped playing in March.
Yeah.
Then you have a whole group of players, a whole group of teams, Clay, that basically finish by September 1st. That's plenty of time off to get ready for a season. I think for a guy like LeBron, if the season started on December 22nd, that's 8 days before his 36th birthday. I get it with him, but I think LeBron would probably play on ring night, and then I think he would play on Christmas Day, and then from that point on, he'd probably do a lot of load managing. But guess what? Fans aren't going to be allowed in the arenas anyway, so it's not like he's going to be disappointing the fans of Utah when he doesn't show up in Salt Lake City on a Tuesday night in January.
It is interesting to think about what the plan will be and also what the guys are going to get paid, because I would think, and I don't know how many conversations they've had, and I'm curious whether you've been heard about any of these reports, but I would think that the average NBA player is going to make at most half of what they contracted for to make. They made a little bit less last year, but the season that just finished, but they were actually benefited because they played much of the regular season by the time they actually had to shut it down. So what ends up happening in your mind? Do players recognize how much of pay cuts they're going to get? And then if they're not willing to play until January, theoretically you're knocking what would be a 72-game season maybe down to a 60-game season, just based on what that would be from a timing perspective, because it does seem that there's an acknowledgement that the NBA is going to get done before the Olympics are scheduled to happen in mid to late July.
Yeah, and remember too that 72 games is important because that that satisfies those regional contracts, and this way the teams get all their money. There's a reason why they came up with that number of wanting to play 72 games. So again, I think Chris Paul being the president of the union, I think LeBron kind of locked in. And if you talk to players, and I've talked to the father of a couple of younger NBA players, and their thing was, the older players in the NBA, they owe it to the younger players to do this.
Yeah.
So the younger players can get their money. Guys like Chris Paul and LeBron, they have a king's ransom. They basically could open up their own banks. They have so much money. And, so back in the day, older players were looking out for them. It's not going to be up to them to look out for young players because your earning power, not every player is going to make that much money. So I think for those guys to get back out there, and again, I understand for some it's a quick turnaround, but I think more so than ever, hey, the fans for whatever reason and even media have come to kind of accept load management. So you'll probably just see a lot more of that this season.
One of the things that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, we've got college football, we got the NFL going on, the Masters going to be in a couple weeks. So there's certainly a lot of we just had the World Series in. and the NBA and when they may restart is getting attention. But I haven't heard anybody really in a big way talking about college basketball, which is kind of crazy. And they have a big decision to make in terms of what that's going to look like as well. I saw where the idea of a bubble with college basketball starting in November with ESPN kind of fell apart. Have you heard very much talk about college basketball?
Not yet. And I think a big part of it, what they could end up doing is you can play a lot of conference games where, let's face it, a lot of teams could end up just traveling by bus to those games. So I think that's how it could break down. So maybe you're not going to get a 25 or 30 game season. But you know what, though? You could be in a scenario where in an NCAA type of format, maybe you could almost have just about every team make the tournament, where you forget about these conference championships. You have every team make the tournament, and then eventually you reduce down to one bubble. Because, again, you can get the NCAA tournament over in 2 weeks.
Yep.
Even less than that, because I get that the Final Four, they're going to want to have a lot of build-up to something like that, but you can get the thing done rather quickly. It's single elimination. I mean, you're not playing best 4 out of 7. It's single elimination, so they could do it. I had heard from a lot of college basketball people, Clay, and you would know this, they didn't have any plan because this all hit them out of nowhere. So they couldn't come up with something quick enough to come up with a bubble. They lost so much money. I had heard no matter what happens this year, there will be an NCAA tournament. I mean, Mike Krzyzewski even said it, that they need a tournament. So regular season, that's where they could take a hit, and maybe they'll play fewer games. But from everything that I've heard, they're going to have an NCAA tournament.
We're talking with Frank Isola at the Frank Isola on Twitter, ESPN, The Athletic, Sirius XM. You're up in New York where there is a lot of bad NFL football being played.
Yep.
And you have sitting right now the 0-7 New York Jets, who are atrocious. What do you think about Trevor Lawrence's decision as to whether or not he should come out? If you were advising Trevor Lawrence, and it looks like the Jets are a fairly substantial favorite to be the overall number 1 pick holder, would you go to the Jets, or would you consider demanding a trade and or potentially going back to Clemson for another season?
Yeah, to me, I think if he has a really solid year this year at Clemson, there's no reason to think why he wouldn't. I mean, how could you advise a guy to go back to college? I understand that the college experience is great, everything like that, but he's now done it. And, he already has a national championship, could get a Heisman Trophy. There'd be no reason for him to stay. He has to come out. Then once you come out, if you want to play games and demand a trade, Eli Manning didn't want to play with the Chargers. Peyton Manning didn't want to play. Who was it with? Well, he didn't want to play with the Jets. Remember, he stayed at Tennessee one extra year. John Elway, a million years ago, didn't want to play for the Colts, where he didn't want to go there, and he ended up going to the Broncos. So it wouldn't be the first quarterback that did it. But come on. If the Jets have the worst record in the league, there's no way that the head coach will be there. There's a chance that the GM could be different. So that changes a lot. And, my only thing about the Jets being completely inept right now, it wasn't that long ago that they went to back-to-back AFC championship games. They're not the Detroit Lions that never win anything. Like the Jets, the Jets went on the road with Rex Ryan and Mark Sanchez, for crying out loud, as their quarterback, and they won in Indianapolis against Peyton Manning one year in the playoffs. And then they eliminated Tom Brady up in Foxborough. So I get it. The Jets haven't been to a Super Bowl since Joe Namath was running off the field down in Miami. I get all that. But they have been close before. They have had a modicum of playoff success. It's not completely a lost cause. So I still think it's a good story right now. I find it hard to believe that at the very least, he's going to be Trevor Lawrence is going to be in the NFL next season. I can't imagine he's going to be back in Clemson.
We just started off the show talking about the Big Ten having to cancel the Nebraska-Wisconsin game. How much of a mess did the Big Ten make bringing its games back, which I give them credit for finally realizing they were wrong to cancel in August, but bringing them back without any safety net to allow games to be suspended? They have no bye weeks. They have no added week to the season, compared to the Big 12, the SEC, and the ACC, who did that and built in ample, it appears, knock on wood, ample weeks to allow their seasons to be completed.
Yeah, and I think that's why they wanted to start when they did, because they figured if the cases spike, we've already got a bunch of games, and that was the idea. For a lot of college students, they're coming home Thanksgiving week and not even going back until after Christmas.
That's right.
That was part of the plan. And it's funny, too, because really their idea now is, in order to play in that conference championship game, you have to play in at least 6 games. But we know that if our guy Ryan Day and Ohio State, something tells me, if they had only 5 wins and they were 5-0, I have a funny feeling they would end up.
And also, it's
in the
Ohio
game.
State isn't not in the position. Even if they do everything right, some of their opponents might do everything right, and right is in quotation marks because it doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong if you test positive, right? I mean, you can just have bad luck. I mean, you're on a college campus. I mean, things happen where you get exposed and you didn't even have to do anything wrong.
And I still don't understand though. If you're having some guys test positive, why can't you just do a situation when those players are isolated? You're testing other players, and you show up and play with however many guys you have. I remember when I was at Maryland, for home games, they would have 100 guys on the sideline.
Yeah, that's right.
Because for home games, everyone's allowed to wear the uniform. Obviously, when you travel, you only bring a certain amount of players. A lot of that has to do with finance. You're not going to put 100 guys up in a hotel room, for crying out loud. So it seems like you would have enough players to play with to try to get these games in. And you're right, that's what they're worried about. What if you get some teams with 5 games? That's it's certainly not ideal.
Good stuff as always, Frank Isola. We'll talk to you next week. Have a good Halloween.
Thanks, Clay. You too.